I'm John Miller. I'm Professor Emeritus at the School of Journalism at Ryerson. I have been a journalist all my life, and before I came to Ryerson 23 years ago, I was a senior editor at the Toronto Star. It's a big question. It tells us, what's happening. It tells us who's a newsmaker, who's influential. By leaving stories out, it tells us who's not important. By emphasizing a certain type of story, like crime in the black community in Scarborough, it creates a stereotype that is not necessarily true. And it turns people off. There's research done in the newspaper, preliminary focus group research among newspaper readers who are non-white, that they feel alienated by the media, by the coverage. They feel like they're treated like foreigners. And so they turn away from the media. And if they turn away from the media, there's also some evidence that they turn away from being citizens. In other words, they're less likely to vote. They're less likely to get engaged civically. And that's not good. That's plainly not good. Nobody wants that. Well, I was at last year's DiverseCity launch, and I think somewhere along the line mentioned that the media has been left out, and it's an important institution. The media really, it's like a window through which a lot of people see the world and their society. And if they look through that window and it's full of stereotypes, or it's unrepresentative of the city we live in, then that is going to become people's reality if they don't experience it any other way. So stereotypes, we know, are a problem for many racialized minorities, and a lot of them are propagated through the media. So for me, it's a question of accuracy, and that's right up there in the value system of most media organizations, that they strive to be accurate. We live in the most multicultural city in North America, and if that's not reflected in our media, we're giving a skewed picture of who we are. Well, nothing gets done. The media are very hierarchical institutions. It's not a democracy in a newsroom. Somebody has to say, this is what we're going to lead with, this is how it's going to be told, here are the stories we're going to feature in this order. And that comes from the top, and ultimately, comes from the publisher or the president of the news program, or the station manager, or the managing editor, or the senior editors. And that's why we delve down to that level in our look at the media, because we wanted to find out how diverse that leadership is. And some of the stuff that pops out is very revealing. 3 out of the 4 newspapers we looked at had no diversity in their news leadership in a city like Toronto. To me, that's important information that the media would take from this study. Maybe we should, think about developing some leadership. The media is in a very challenging situation. They're shedding people, and their answer to our study might be, well, you don't know what we're going through. Like we're getting rid of people. You want us to, hire more people? And we're saying, no, it's not that. It's not that simple. You can do a lot by not hiring a soul, just by changing the habits of the people that you do have as reporters. Most of our recommendations are things that they could change tomorrow, just by saying, okay, well, if you're going off and doing a story about high school students buying prom dresses, don't just interview white females, because that's that's not reality, that's not accurate, and you have a much more interesting story if you have a diverse group of interviewers. It would be more accurate and more interesting. And it sends a message that, you know, okay, well, here are people from a variety of cultures all having a common experience, but they may be approaching it through different lenses, and they'll say different things. So I think it's all about better journalism, really. It's not tokenism at all. Well, you know, for instance, you know, 10 years ago, we worried at our school, the School of Journalism, that we weren't getting a diverse, you know, student body, and so we started looking into that, and we realized that look at the literature we put out about our school. It only shows white students and white faculty. Look at you know, where what we say about our school. Look at the courses in our curriculum and so on. It all sends a message, and I think that's, you know, it's not too hard to change the message if you want to you know, attract a diverse readership or viewership for your news program. That's, you know, the business of the media is in trouble because they're not attracting greater numbers of readers and viewers. Is there business to be gained by embracing diversity? We think that there is evidence that there is. Yes, it's a snapshot, so it's not a you know a complete analysis over time of everything they do, but we wanted to focus on what's visible. In other words, who's a host, who's a reporter, who's telling the story, who's a columnist in the newspaper, who are those people, what kinds of columns do they write, and let's take a look at how diverse they are. You know, in terms of columns, some of the stuff that jumped out was, of all of the sports sections in all of the newspapers that we looked at over a constructed week, there was not one sports column written by a visible minority. That's something that the media should think about because there's great participation by non-whites in sports in this city. And if the people telling them about it are not representative of the diversity of the participants, then that may be that may cause a lack of trust and engagement. The other point is that who you see influences who you think has authority, and so if all the experts are white, then that's sending a message. Some of those decisions are made for a variety of reasons. You know, literally thousands and thousands of decisions get made every day in newsrooms about what to cover and who appears on air. And if you're going back to the same sources, you know, you're using the same old Rolodex because this person has appeared on our program before, they speak well, and they're sort of eager to get their names before the media, therefore we know what we're getting. And those people get chosen again and again and again, where these media, if they just go by that sort of rote decision, they're missing out on emerging people who have something maybe a little different to say, and their sources are going to be richer. We also looked at types of stories too, and particularly on television, everyday stories like the weather and traffic and education and health. You know, the March break getaway was a story that was captured in our week, and it was amazing that camera crews would go to the airport and you'd see all this diversity of faces in the background, but overwhelmingly the people who were interviewed about getting away were white. And so it was unreflective of what you saw in the background. And some of these decisions are made unconsciously, but they're made, and they have an impact when they're shown on television. We didn't find a lot of evidence for that, but there's no doubt that using the electronic media to further diversity and find diverse bloggers is an easy thing for the media to do if they wanted to. They don't have to hire somebody, train them, and give them space in the paper. They can put it on their websites. And the newspapers in this city and the broadcasters, their websites are very influential. People turn to them for news. In some cases more than they turn to the newspapers or the broadcast, the televised news reports. So I think diversifying their websites is a step that they could make. I don't know whether that's on any of their agendas or not, but that's one of the things that's suggested in our research for them to take action on. Plus the fact that there's pretty they're not reinventing the wheel. There's a very comprehensive diversity best practices document that was adopted a few years ago by the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, and they were pressured by the CRTC to come up with this set of best practices. And they did a very impressive survey of best practices in Europe and the United States, across Canada. It's a really good plan that's available for anybody to follow, and it would make a difference. There's research that's been done in the Chinese Canadian communities in Toronto and Vancouver that shows that both very large communities in these two cities, that more Chinese Canadians read the Chinese language media press than read the English press, and that's a really significant to the business case for diversity. If a newspaper in Toronto wants to reach all those people, how are they going to do it? Is it because they don't cover that community, or that the Chinese media is so much better? I think it's a bit of both, and there's opportunities for partnerships here between the mainstream media and the Chinese media and the media of many other ethnic populations to do things like have co-sponsor a wire service where the stories from the ethnic media are going to be circulated to other ethnic papers and to the English language media. Even if they're not used verbatim, they're telling the mainstream media that these are stories in those communities that they might not be aware of. The Toronto Star has recognized this. They own Tsingtao, which is the largest Chinese newspaper in Toronto. And when I say the largest Chinese newspaper, the largest ethnic newspapers in Toronto, and there are very many of them. There's 250 newspapers published in language other than English in the GTA, including 10 daily newspapers. They're all very small circulation relative to the mainstream papers. That 50, 60,000 is a big paper. So none of these papers individually can reach a mass population, and so and being small, they lack the resources to cover everything in the community. So there's some merit in thinking about a strategic partnership here where they can maybe get the resources to cover that and have the ability to share, settlement information and other news with other ethnic papers. I think it would bring more people to the attention of the mainstream media. One of the parts of our study is we examined whose picture appears in different parts of the paper, and it was very notable that the business sections had a lower percentage of non-white people pictured as leaders. Now, if you look at any group, demographic group in Toronto, they are very, very active in the business community, especially small business, but also very large business. There's a lot of wealth through business in these ethnic communities. It's not being reflected in the business sections. It's not being reflected in the lifestyle sections either. And the lifestyle section should be about everybody. So I think it would bring more of the people who could participate in these sections to the attention of the mainstream media. Yes, we found quite a good percentage of diverse reporters on television stations, but it tends to be, diversity tends to be skin deep on some of the telecasts, because when you look at the behind-the-scenes decision makers, you don't find that diversity, and you don't find those reporters bringing their diversity to the news. They're producing some of the same types of news as anybody else would. So there's definite room for progress there. And in newspapers, the same deal, really. Why, when we did our snapshot of what is in the papers, that's an easy thing for a professional news organization to do on a regular basis, so that they can take a picture of themselves and say, how are we doing? And in our case study of Metro Morning, which was and also ran as a morning radio program, 10 years ago, they said, does our broadcast reflect our city? And they said no. So they changed that. They made different decisions about who to get as an expert. They made different decisions about the music they'd play. They made different decisions about the stories they cover. They made different decisions about the accents that they would allow on radio. And lo and behold, a very direct cause, and everybody associated with the show will say the same thing. Strategically, that was by adopting the business case for diversity, they shot to the fore. I'm sure it's the only market in Canada where the CBC leads in the morning. And there was a ripple effect, so that the subsequent morning shows, I believe it's The Current and Shangomeshi, they hold that audience, so that CBC in Toronto is the leading radio show, leading radio station across the spectrum. And that's a remarkable, just follow their lead, and maybe the same thing will happen to another media that decides to do the same thing. There's no evidence that the reverse is true. We can't say because you're not diverse, you're failing as a business. But if here's a business that's achieved success through embracing diversity, then that's maybe a model somebody might like to try. Just some of the gaps in coverage. I did a very similar survey to this snapshot of newspapers 15 years ago, and the methodology was somewhat different, but I looked at newspaper pictures in sections, and the percentage is not entirely all that different today, 15 years later. And of course, 15 years ago, the demographics of non-whites in Toronto were very different. So the newspapers are falling behind in depicting that, and I think the advantage of looking at the media through this study is, in a very, comprehensive way, we're doing that snapshot of the media and saying, gee, look at the percentages of non-whites in the Toronto population of 40%, and none of the percentages of pictures in any of your sections approaches that. So is there something that should change here? Is reflecting your community really important to you? And what would it take to do that?